Money and mindset are inextricably linked. You can have all the knowledge and all the skills in the world and still sabotage yourself with limiting beliefs. Now, this is an area that we have explored in many, many different ways, both on Moolala, the radio show, and also at Credit Canada, where I work in the world of our financial coaching programs. Kelly Cowan is a facilitator of those programs, and I've asked her to join me in today's conversation in which we look at this idea of beliefs. Hello, Kelly.
Hello, Bruce.
So the particular idea that we're going to focus on today is, I'm going to use air quotes here, the upper limit problem, a term used by the psychologist and best-selling author Gay Hendricks in his book called The Big Leap. Kelly, what in particular resonated for you about this topic?
Well, what I find happens in our financial coaching programs is participants are trying to get out of debt and they're almost out of debt. And then weirdly, they go back into debt and they don't seem to be able to break the cycle. And they also really struggle to talk about it in relationships.
Gay Hendricks joins us now to talk about upper limits and ways to overcome them. He is in Ojai, California. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Bruce and Kelly. It's great to be with you. This is a subject that I am passionate to talk about, so I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. I want to start with like the very basics. What is an upper limit problem? It's a great phrase. I can see all the words that are lined up. They make sense in English, but what does it mean?
It means that you have a pattern of sabotaging yourself when things start going better. And the upper limit problem, and I detail all this in the book, The Big Leap, is born out of fear that you have a fear that you can't go to the next level in your life. And so you keep creating unconsciously out of your old belief system ways of sabotaging yourself. So something good happens at work, then you get into a huge argument at home. Something good happens at home, you go to work and find out some problem there. So a lot of times the upper limit problem, the reason it's so tricky to spot, it took me 30 years to figure it out. People always ask me how long it took me to write The Big Leap. And I say, well, it took me a year, but I spent 30 years thinking about it beforehand. So, but what I had noticed over and over again, first in my own life, is I would upper limit myself. I would have some kind of breakthrough. The first time I noticed it, I lost some weight. I was trying to lose weight and I lost 30 pounds over the course of a month. And then I went totally unconscious and went out and had an ice cream sundae and messed up my whole thing that I had going, And so I went from feeling so good to feeling terrible just as a result of 20 minutes of packing sugar and fat into my body. But those are just one example. I mean, there's lots of examples of the upper limit problem that we can get into.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. So in the spirit of that, I thought we could play a bit of a game. We'll call it fill in the blanks. And I'll start a sentence and you would complete it with a typical upper limit problem, just to finish it off. Okay, you ready?
Mm-hmm. I am.
Okay, if I just had more money,
I would be able to avoid the pain that I feel in my life.
Okay, once I pay my debt off.
Once I pay my debt off, oh, I'd be so happy, but then I wouldn't be able to maintain the happiness because I don't believe I deserve good things in life.
Right. I can't ask my partner to talk about money because
I have a deep old fear, an old limiting belief that you shouldn't talk about or bring up the important things in life. You're supposed to keep them hidden.
Wow. I can imagine for our listeners, there is a deep level of resonance and probably like a bit of a shocker that you've got their number and you understand them so deeply. What's your hypothesis as to why we do this? I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive.
It does. And it is. And the reason, the reason is that for thousands and hundred thousands of years, human beings have been dealing with adversity. And we have many, many, many strategies for dealing with adversity. I mean, just look at the bottom of your foot. how many more pain points does the bottom of the foot have compared to the top of your head? Well, the reason it has thousands and thousands of places where you can step on something and it'll tell you right away is because we've been walking barefoot for hundreds of thousands of years. And so we developed strategies for dealing with that kind of adversity. But what we don't have yet is how to deal with things going well for longer and longer periods of time. So what I did in the Big Leap and what I'm promoting is the idea that by working on yourself, your mindset a little bit, you can actually increase the amount of time you feel good inside and you feel good in your relationships, and happiness flows in your relationships. And it also translates into your Moolala life. I've certainly
Yes.
done a lot with my financial life since I caught on to my upper limits 50 years ago. I went from relatively poor to fairly rich in the period of 50 years by just keeping letting go of limiting beliefs.
Wow. You describe four hidden barriers in particular. I'm just going to name them here. Feeling fundamentally flawed, disloyalty and abandonment, believing that more success makes you a bigger burden, and this one, the crime of outshining. Talk a bit more about what those mean to you and how you arrived at those as being the barriers that you wanted to highlight.
Well, how I arrived at them was by working with 800 executives before I worked the Big Leap. And then afterwards, I think we've worked with about 1,700 different executives, C-suite executives in different companies around the world. And so that's where I got it, because what I found was that even very successful people have these upper limits. I first discovered it. I had the great good fortune of being in the right place at the right time in 1970s, early 1970s. I was getting my doctorate at Stanford in counseling psychology. And we got a lot of referrals from the new businesses that were in Silicon Valley, because these were incredibly brilliant people that were forming all the companies like Hewlett Packard and Apple and all that we have today. And these were younger people, oftentimes, that didn't have any stigma about going to counseling or therapy. And so many times we would have the chairman of the board call us up and say, hey, could you see our CEO? He's having trouble with ... And we would create a way of that person dealing with whatever the problem was. And that's how I came up with these hypotheses. Also, there are other people like a great psychiatrist, no longer with us, in San Francisco, named Dr. Joseph Weiss, was very key in helping me understand my original ideas. So I got them from practical reality, where I would see, here's a great example. One of the first times I saw it, one of my Silicon Valley clients had spent a year developing a product, and this was a high-end product that sold for close to $500,000. It was something in the high-tech world, and I don't even remember what it did, but he had put his heart and soul into this thing. And one afternoon, the head of the company comes in and says, this thing is selling like hotcakes. I'm going to give you a little bonus. And he handed my client a check for $150,000. And my client at the time was making less than that. He was making like $120 a year or something like that. And I mean, it was a life-changing amount of money for him at the time. So what did he do? Did he celebrate all the way home? Did he stop along the way and buy a new car? Did he
No.
No,
Yeah.
no. The punchline here is he went home and, in his words, created the worst argument he'd had in 12 years of marriage with his wife. And they had 2 kids too, and they got involved with it. And this all takes place on a Friday night, when you got a whole weekend, you could have been out celebrating and spending that money. And instead, they were in locked horns combat for the next few days until we kind of staged a little intervention and worked out the thing. But, this is a good example of that.
That is a great example. And it's a good example of how people aren't really aware of what's happening in their thinking, right? Just when you hit that upper limit. Why else is it important for people to get more awareness to those 4 patterns.
Yes, I wanted to say a little bit more about the pattern that Bruce mentioned, the one about outshining, because this really has a grip on a lot of people, even incredibly brilliant people. I give the example of my stack of quarters. One time we had, up until about 25 years ago, we had a place over on the beach in Carpinteria, California, and before we moved up the valley here. And one of my neighbors down the beach was a very famous rock star. And we'd been friends before I actually moved over there. And I'd had dinner, and Katie and I had dinner with him and his wife. And so I got a call from him one day, and he says, I think I'm having what they call a panic attack. Can I come over and talk to you? And so he kind of jogged over, and we were standing on my deck. And he was having the early stages of a panic attack. And so I gave him some breathing things to do and calmed him down right away, just so he could kind of stay in his body. And it turned out the precipitating event was that he was going down the next day to get his palm prints on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and which would seem on the surface like a really good thing. But it had induced a panic attack because he had this underlying fear that he'd been dealing with all his life about feeling 2 things: fundamentally unworthy of the good things of life due to a lot of trauma in his early background. And the second thing was this fear of outshining, that it had kept propelling him to be more and more successful. But even at the highest end, he was always going around comparing himself to other people and feeling like he wasn't as good and didn't deserve to be, And then the precipitating event was, you got to go down and put your handprints forever in concrete. And what really triggered it is the guy next to him was somebody like John Wayne or somebody that was super famous, so he couldn't any longer say, I don't belong in this company. And so boom, up comes all of this old stuff. So after I kind of got him calmed down a little bit, I talked to him about this issue, this upper limit issue. And then I said, let's do a little practice for tomorrow. And he said, okay. And it just so happened that I had a stack of about 10 or 12 quarters because the condo we lived in, the basement of it, there was a washing machine down there. And that's what I used it for. So I brought my stack of quarters out. And I said, look me in the eye now. Let's make contact. And I took one of the quarters and I said, stick out your hand. And I said, here. And I put the quarter in the middle of his hand. And he just stared at it. Like, what? What are you doing this for? And I said, okay, look me in the eye once again. Look me in the eye. I took another quarter. I put it there on the top. Now he's got 50 cents. And he's still, I don't get it. And so I put another one there. We go through this sequence again till there's about almost $2 worth of quarters in his hand, a whole stack. And so I said, one thing you haven't done over the past couple of minutes, I've been giving you steadily free money, and you have yet to thank me. He had this big emotional explosion, broke into tears, and it was the whole I don't deserve it thing. And so after a while, I got him so he would take a quarter and say thank you. And the next day, I didn't follow up until a few days after the Hollywood Walk of Fame incident, but he said as he's putting his hands in the concrete, he's thinking about receiving a quarter from me in those hands. That had made an impression on him that let him know that, hey, I don't have to carry around these upper limits anymore. So there's a kind of a long-winded example, but if you think about it, we've all got things like that. You may not be on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but somebody gave you a compliment the other day and you didn't know how to handle it. You brushed it aside. That's the upper limit problem. Or you had a beautiful experience and then 10 seconds later were worrying about some work incident. You were watching a sunset with your beloved and suddenly you find yourself thinking about an argument you had at work that day. Those are all the upper limit problem, because the upper limit problem is an allergy to feeling good. We have to get over our allergy to feeling good and allow ourselves to feel good and have the flow of honor, love, and respect in our relationships at home and our work all the time. That's who we are. That's what we deserve. And that's possible. I know it's possible because my wife and I have lived in this house for 25 years, and neither one of us have said a cross word to the other one in that entire
Wow.
time.
I
Yeah,
love
wow.
the allergy idea. There is no EpiPen for this. There is no Benadryl for this. So can you talk a bit about solutions to dealing with or wrestling with or reconciling these limiting beliefs that people listening to our conversation can enact in their life, that they won't be required to sit across from you and receive those quarters before they get their own handprint on the Walk of Fame?
Well, good. Well, I appreciate you saying that there's no EpiPen. I'd certainly like to invent one. So if there's any VC people listening today,
Right.
think about that. But no, in fact, all of the solutions have to be natural. Because if you think about it, the ways people try to extend positive energy unnaturally doesn't work very well. Because if you try to do that with alcohol, for example, I'm not a drinker, but a friend of mine said that for 15 minutes, alcohol is the best drug. I don't know. I haven't had my 15 minutes yet, but he said then it wears off and then you want some more alcohol. So, and that takes you down a long path. And same thing with what they used to say about cocaine is that people take cocaine, again, to feel good. And, the first thing the cocaine wants is, it wants you to feel good. It wants you to keep feeling good. And, but unnatural things never work. So what you have to do is use your natural resources. Number one, become friends with fear. Become friends with your fear. Understand your fear. Talk about it. Feel it. Take 10 seconds just to locate it where you feel it in your body, because the upper limit problem is always based on fear that you don't pay attention to because it's buried down in kind of the old unexplored stuff of your unconscious. See, most of these upper limit problems, we don't make them up ourselves. We're kind of born into them. You're born into a family maybe that doesn't feel like they deserve the good things of life, or you were born into a family that had a terrible thing happen 3 generations ago that people are still suffering from, and they don't feel like they're entitled to good things because of this bad thing that happened. Here, since we've worked with, I think we've worked with, in addition to executives, I think we've worked with about close to 20,000 people in our seminars in our office here. And the thing to remember about that is out of those 20,000 people, I haven't found anybody yet that doesn't have the upper limit problem. And so, if you're at the top of the game or wherever you are in the game, just start making friends with your fear, because they're all based on fears. The second thing to realize is that none of those old beliefs are correct. They were just implanted in your mind because of where you were born or something that happened. And a belief can be unmade just as easily as it's made. So you could have a new belief inserted in your software that says, hey, I deserve the good things of life. I'm okay with feeling love 24 hours a day. I'm okay with being wealthy. I'm okay with being happy all the time. Work on those kinds of giving yourself more permission and get over that allergy the natural way.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. One thing that struck me is the fact that it doesn't matter whether you're in debt or you actually have a lot of money and success, that at wherever you are, you can bump up against your upper limit based on those things. One of the things we're hoping to do is like kind of connect the dots here between money and relationships, particularly for our listeners. Tell me more about how people could take the fear, make friends with the fear when it's like the connection between money and relationships. So you have a secret debt and you haven't told your spouse and you're afraid. So help me help them.
Well, the relationship between relationships and money is totally connected because it's all about the flow of energy. So some people can't receive a compliment. I remember one time at Thanksgiving many years ago when my beloved mother-in-law, Polly, was still with us. Um, Polly was a wonderful cook and made this wonderful pumpkin pie, but she could not take a compliment. I was just buried in her nature. And I remember one day I said, "Oh, that was delicious pumpkin pie, Polly." And she's, "Do you think so? I thought it had too much cinnamon." I said, "No, it just had the perfect amount of cinnamon. I've never had a pumpkin pie." So anyway, we kept going on and she kept denying it over and over and over again. So she had a very small tolerance for incoming positive energy. That's the problem we have with both love and money, that people develop an intolerance for it getting to a certain place and have to mess it up. And so it's all about the flow of energy. But it's interesting too. Speaking of the palm prints and the Hollywood Walk of Fame, I've had relationship counseling sessions with people who had immense amounts of money. For example, picture a billionaire and his wife of 25 years, couple of kids, but they keep having this recurring argument. And you know what the argument is about? It's about money. And when it boils down to it, what really bugs him is her spending $7.69 for the organic peanut butter when she could get the $2.99 regular old peanut butter like he used to eat as a kid. And so they would go round and round with an argument that was basically, so I blew the whistle on him. I said, "Okay, you have your phone, get out the calculator." And so he got out the calculator and we worked out, anyway, it took us a few minutes to do this, but we worked out that he could buy a jar of organic peanut butter for every person on earth and have change left over. Okay, so at the very top of the game, that doesn't stop people from arguing about money because it's really, see, a lot of issues in restricting money supply come out of fear, and it's about contraction. And there was some point in the person's life where they got contracted around money. And even though they may have made $1 billion after that, it didn't touch the basic contraction that needed. In fact, it's amazing to me that, I started working with juvenile delinquents and their families when I was 22 years old. I had my first job working with juvenile delinquents. And then I ran a halfway house for a while before I went back and got my doctorate. And so I had a lot of experience working with very poor families. And the astounding thing to me, looking back on it now 50 years, is that rich people's families fight more about money than poor people families. If you don't believe it, you'll just have to take my word for it.
Yeah,
because
I believe it.
Yeah. And because a lot of times people in poor families have developed a basic agreement that things aren't possible, that things aren't really going to change. And so change is like reshuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's basically a sinking operation that you're trying to do. And a lot of my work in those days had to do with, like helping keeping their kid out of jail and helping keeping their kid off drugs and what to do when he was in the hospital and things like that. So they were kind of fundamental problems they have to crack. But no question about it, finances is at the heart and soul of a lot of problems. But keep your focus on fear, because if you can unwind what you're scared about, you can unwind that allergy to having abundance and success and a flow of love in your relationships.
What do you notice about the link between being friends with fear and the behaviors that follow? And I ask because I think you've air quotes convinced us. Yes, we need to address this. We need to have this insight. And what our listeners and what participants in our programs, the leap that they will want to make, talking about the big leap, is to, okay, what does this mean about how I live my life differently? Does what you're saying kind of create a new opening or space and the behaviors just follow? Or how does that work? How does it actually, like on the ground, alter the way they pay their credit card on time and alter the way they take that extra shift at work? The kinds of things that then add up to the numbers on a page.
Yes. Well, the beautiful thing about human resilience and human change is a person can be struggling with an upper limit problem. Let's say it's based on the number one upper limit problem, which is for some reason, I don't feel like I deserve love, money, and the good things of life for whatever reason. That may have taken 30 years to establish itself, but it only takes a split second to change that and realize, oh, you know what? I see where I got that way of thinking. Now let me expand my mindset. I deserve abundance. I deserve love. I'm willing to receive all the good things of life. See, it doesn't take long to remake an old belief. And once you've remade it, it's like watching a movie and you see Godzilla and it scares you and you close your eyes, but Godzilla is still there. Just because your eyes are closed doesn't mean the threat is gone. You have to look straight in the eye of fear and then say, okay, I acknowledge that I'm scared of having abundance. I'm scared of having love 24 hours a day for some reason. And it's usually unconscious because we don't know where these things get underway a lot of times. Like the other day, I was walking down the street and I saw some beautiful rings in the window of a jewelry store that I've often gone into. And I didn't have time to go in there, but I took note of how beautiful they were. And then I was walking on down the street. 10 seconds later, I'm locked into a scene in my mind of a bunch of children I saw in India in 1980 carrying bags of cement up a hill and seeing that and thinking, wait a minute, children that age shouldn't be working, carrying stuff. And then I saw there was about 150 other kids just sitting there watching them. And I found out that those kids hadn't been able to get the job that paid 1 rupee a day, which at the time was worth a dime. So these kids were carrying sacks up a hill at age 10. And why was I thinking about that? Well, I analyzed it later. I stopped and I thought about how did I get from beautiful rings to poverty in India in 10 seconds? It's the upper limit problem. I saw it. Then I thought about poverty. And then my mind dialed up that painting, that picture. And so within a few seconds, I've gone from the exaltation of beauty to the misery of to poverty in my head. That's the upper limit problem at work. The very first activity in it is one I would like to suggest for everyone, which you develop a new idea in your mind, which goes something like, every day I expand more and more into my genius. Because the solution for the upper limit problem is to get busy working on your genius zone, figuring out what you love to do and do it. So get a new idea established in your mind and just keep reflecting on it day after day. The one I suggest in the book, as I've used with lots of people, which is just put a new idea in there that every day I expand more into my genius. Every day I do more of what I love to do. Every day I do more and more of what makes my biggest contribution to the world.
Wow. Well, I think you have done a great job expanding into your genius in our conversation today. Gay, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, guys. Bruce, Kelly, it's great talking to you. Hope to see you again sometime.
And we hope so as
Thanks,
well.
Gay.
Thank you.